G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Today, we're really lucky to have Bruce Baynes with us. Bruce is the Managing Director of Sage Care Advice, a financial planning firm specialising in aged care advice. Bruce has over 20 years' experience as a financial advisor and made the leap to specialising solely in aged care when he personally had to navigate the stressful and complex process of getting his father into aged care. Aged care is dauntingly complex and stressful for the family and full of traps for the inexperienced. It's unbelievably expensive and contribute to a major loss of family wealth. But in many cases, with good advice and planning, it doesn't necessarily have to. Now, if you're thinking, I don't need to really worry about listening to anything about aged care as I'm not going to go into care anytime soon, well, think again. You might not be, but I bet at some stage you're going to have to deal with helping your parents go into care. Now, if you want to protect the family's intergenerational wealth, this will interest you, and it's important to know that sometimes you need to prepare years in advance to get the best outcome. Now, I'm glad to have Bruce here as he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to aged care, and each and every time I talk to him, I always learn something new. So, welcome, Bruce.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Now, before we dig in, I just want to be really clear, keep the lawyers happy. What we're discussing today is just general information and it isn't advice. So before acting, always make sure you get personalised advice to your situation. So got to keep the lawyers happy, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all for that.
Now, Bruce, I always like to start with this first question. For us to get a better idea of who you are as a person, what would you say is one of your key personal values and how do you think it's contributed to the person you are today?
Well, Ben, I think you'll relate to this because I'm a country boy myself and country people seem to have this honesty about them and they also seem to have this openness about them. My wife has said to me on many occasions, Brucey, you just say exactly what you're thinking and you don't upset people. I don't know how you get away with it. It's not that I'm trying to upset people. It's just that I'm right up front and honest and I'm not meaning it any other way. So I think the values that have been instilled into me and one that I try to live by in business and in life is how do you want to be remembered? And I want to be remembered as doing the right thing and trying to do the best that I could with every situation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I met you coming up for almost 20 years ago, Bruce. When
be a while. I had hair then.
Yeah, and I had much less grey. So yeah, and that's why we hit it off straight. You know, we come from a similar background, and both were just working hard to help people. So that was really good. So, okay, now. I know you got interested in aged care because your dad, you shared that with me quite a while ago. But what made you make the big jump and commit to aged care, Bruce? Because that's a big change. Like you sold your practice, you moved into just specialising in aged care. What sort of made you commit to that?
Well, Ben, my first aged care client, and I don't mind saying the lady's name, I'm pretty sure she's not with us now. She was 95, and it was in December 2003. Gladys Bell. Now, Gladys was a lovely lady, and she particularly wanted to get to this one facility. Back then, we had high care nursing home or low care hostels, and she wanted to get into this facility because she had a few mates there, which made a lot of sense. Back then, we bid our way in. So highest bidder got the bed, basically.
Wow.
So I have always provided some financial advice with regard to aged care since then on the coast. And then we lost my mum, as you know, to ovarian cancer. She was Dad's carer for 30 years. It was a pretty tough time because we knew Dad couldn't stay at home, and as you know, he had a fall, as a lot of people do. That's the trigger to have them go to care. I actually said to my sisters, I've done heaps of this, I'll look after this if you like, to which they said, all yours. And they stepped back and let me take the reins. Now, I knew what I was doing. I knew the Aged Care Act. I knew my Centrelink, my superannuation, and I found it daunting. In fact, I came back to the office one day, hit the desk pretty hard with my fist and said, never again are we just going to do the numbers. There's a whole lot more to this. So I was a partner in an accounting firm and I had a financial planning partner, and I decided then that no, this is definitely an area where people need help. I'm just going to do this. My partners weren't on board at that time, but they said they would support me, and I said, you know what, I'm doing it anyway. So I just gave them the option to either buy me out or to sell the practice, and we sold the practice, and that's how Sage Care Advice, after a little transition period, started nearly 5 years ago.
So one of the things I noticed, Bruce, is with aged care is it's such a specialist area that I never touched it. It scared me because I started my career in dealing with Centrelink and pensions and those sorts of things, but it got so complicated I just got scared away. And I know I used to send people on to you to help them because people needed specialist advice. And I saw so many advisors, puddle around in it and sort of part-time do it, and then all of a sudden end up with a massive nightmare. And I think what we came to understand over time, discussing this, was it's more than just the numbers, isn't it?
It's way more than just the numbers. It's an emotional journey. I have 6 full-time employees now, so there's definitely a need for what we do. We don't do anything other than aged care strategic advice, so no products, no commissions, no investment clients, no superannuation clients. As you said, it's not something you can do part-time. Best description I've ever heard of that is you can't be half pregnant. I think that's a pretty good way to put it. You're either all in or you're not.
Yeah, appreciate that. And look, it's the one thing I found really interesting, and we touched on this the other day, but why should people, other than the personal issue of trying to help mum or help dad and get a good outcome for them, why else should they really care about aged care?
Well, there's only 2 alternatives. You're either going to aged care or you didn't make it. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to plan ahead, to go, have I got my assets, have I got my structures in place right, so that when the time comes that should I have to go to aged care, that I'm prepared. You're from a farming background. You can't go, I might just plant wheat in that paddock this month because, that's what I thought to do. But if you don't prepare the ground, if you don't do all the things, and if you don't cycle that over different periods, then you're going to be facing a massive challenge when the time comes. So I think that too many times we go, I'll worry about that when it happens. Well, when it happens, it's like an avalanche. And to just get some things in order makes the world of difference, especially to those that are trying to organise things for you.
Because it's interesting, it's the wealth erosion I saw, Bruce, which is, and I can remember this is probably 7 or 8 years ago when I started dabbling a little bit and looking at it and got frightened away, shall we say. But I started running some rough calculations for myself on a few of my clients that had parents that were getting up towards that age, and I was coming up with numbers like $500,000-$700,000 worth of cost for those families to get their loved ones into aged care for an extended period of time if they didn't prepare and move assets around and do what they needed to do. That's what I saw was the major impetus for a lot of families, is trying to work out how do we structure things so this doesn't impact the intergenerational wealth transfer, or in farming terms, doesn't severely impact the farm or having to have assets sold, or stops us growing the business or the next generation coming through. Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, I think that primarily the people I'm dealing with are the enduring powers of attorney for the one that's going to care. Hopefully they've got that in place. I'll talk about that in a sec. But quite often I will put the question to that enduring power of attorney, which is normally the children, and I'll say, what's more important? Is it accessing ideal care for mum and dad, or is it maximising the estate? Now, 95% of the time I would get, well, no, it's the care. And that's genuinely how they feel. Now, I quite often will not meet my mum or dad that are going to care, but I know their generation, and I will say to them, if I were to ask Dad that same question, then I don't know your dad, but I imagine he would say something along the lines of, well, I want to be cared for, but I want to make sure the government doesn't take all my bloody assets that I've worked years to build up. And that is the concern for them. So it should also be the concern for their enduring powers of attorney to try and honour that as best they can. You mentioned before that it can be several 100,000. It can be. And depending on what you've set up, it can be not much that you have to put out. So one of the other advisors here, Katie, who's been with me for about 8 years, she has a saying that says, aged care is affordable to everybody. And it is. It's just a matter of working out how to do it. So
yeah, be prepared, know what you're going to do.
Just get yourself a little bit of a few things in place. That's all I would suggest.
And it's also good. I mean, I always like to throw my possibly only fan, my mum, under the bus on these things all the time. But I know for a fact I've had the conversation with mum and dad over the years, and mum's always said, if we get to the point where we have to go into care, we want to be looked after for sure. But it's important that your father and I have worked our guts out to do what we've done, and we don't want to get to that stage and then it all be eroded when it could have been avoidable, I think is the most important point. But they're probably happy to pay for the care. They're just saying, well, if it's avoidable, why wouldn't we avoid it? But you've got to do that in advance, and it's a tough discussion to have because it's not set in stone. Like, you don't know everyone's going to go into care. You don't know what the process is. You don't know what the rules will be in the future. But there's some key planning points you can do early on, isn't there? Which we won't touch on just yet. But there's some key planning things you can do to be able to make sure that, well, we're in the best position we possibly could in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now when this happens.
One of the biggest issues I see, especially with farming families, is, as you know, farmers are normally asset rich and cash flow poor. And the asset is generally one asset, or it's an asset that runs livestock or plants a crop on. So it's very hard sometimes to try and plan for money to have affordability of aged care. Everybody wants to just stay at home and live there as long as they can, but there comes a time when that can't occur anymore. So I think to plan ahead and to get your structures right and to get everything in order so that should the inevitable happen, that we're ready to go. And it's not so scary then. Also, I just want to touch there, Ben, because a lot of people talk about the hundreds of thousands, and it can be hundreds of thousands, but the government gives a 100% capital guarantee on any money for one portion of the costs of aged care. So it's really important that people don't listen to their neighbour that had someone go into care many years ago. The rules have changed, and the government does fully support the refunding of any refundable accommodation deposits. So that's good to know.
Yeah, excellent. But again, it's knowing what you're up for, and because it forms part of your business plan in the sense. So I look at my family. Both my grandparents, two of my grandparents passed away who were in care at 97 and 92
You've got
this year.
good genes, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And so they'd been in care for sort of 2 or 3 years each, and something significant had happened in both of their healths. But it was knowing if they were still involved in the farming business would have had to have found the way to fund and work all that out, which then could have meant the business may not have been able to do what it needed to do to keep growing and deal with droughts and whatever else might be happening. So it can actually, if not planned for, can stifle growth, etc.
Oh, it can cause so much stress. I've had some women in my office, in their late 70s, early 80s, and they've been caring for their husband at home as long as they possibly can, and they feel like they've failed them because they've had to go to care. I had one lady in tears saying to me, but I said, death till us depart. But she was worn out. There comes a time. So rather than go, it's never going to happen to me, it's worth just having a look and seeing, well, how do we sit with this?
Where does it go? Okay. Now, we sat down, I think it was 2019 or 2020, Bruce, and I wrote a column in the Queensland Country Life about this, and it was 6 or 7 points that you should know about aged care to give people a little bit of a head start, shall I say. So I thought we might sort of dig into a few of those, if that's okay with you. And I know I gave you that column so we could go back over it again. So the first one I suppose we should touch on is that enduring power of attorney. I thought that'd be a good spot now.
Ben, Ben, I do quite a few talks at view clubs, probus clubs, Rotary, things like that. Now, the main thing that I tell people at the end of my talk is it's nothing to do with me, it's to do with your solicitor, and that's to make sure you have your enduring power of attorney in place. Most people think that because we've been married for 50 years, I can make decisions on behalf of my wife or on behalf of my husband. That's not what the law says. So it's really important, if you've got an enduring power of attorney, make sure it's up to date. Make sure that it's relevant, that it's actually acceptable, because sometimes we see mistakes with them, especially when people try to do them themselves. So that would be a really important part, because if you don't have an enduring power of attorney in place, and then all of a sudden your mum or dad or even your brother or whatever has to go to care, you can't just make those decisions. In Queensland, you have to go through QCAT, which is the Queensland Civil Administrative Tribunal, and you've got to get up in front of a magistrate after doing an application and convince them that you're the one that should be looking after, one, the administrative for the financial, and two, as a guardian, to choose where they live and their health decisions. That's pretty tough. So I think that probably the number one thing I would say would be to make sure you've got your enduring power of attorney in place. We put more emphasis on the will. Well, I suppose it's certain that we're going to pass away. A lady said to me once, none of us are getting out of here alive. I thought that was a pretty good comment. But we're going to live a whole lot longer until we get there. So it's important to have that living will, that enduring power of attorney.
I think that's important. And what I saw over my career, and Bruce, you would have seen this plenty of times, is the common thing that the powers of attorney are out of date. So they have someone that's already passed away, or they're in care themselves, or haven't got the capacity to make the decisions. Second one I always used to see was nobody knew where the original was. Someone had a power of attorney. We had a copy of it, but we don't know where the original is. And the third one is we've got a will. Isn't that a power of attorney?
Exactly.
The same sort of thing. And that happens all the time.
People mix the two up. The other thing that we see are solicitors will try to protect people by making all 3 children or all 4 children the joint power of attorney, all must sign. Well, since then, one's moved to Indonesia and the other one's living in England. That's a very difficult situation. So sometimes we just need to readdress what that looks like and to go, is this in order? Yes, it is. All right, we'll put it away again, but we'll make sure the power of attorney knows where to find it should the situation arise. So I think it's really important.
And also, too, it causes family disagreements also, doesn't it? Because if you've got, say, 5 children or something like that and 4 agree and 1 doesn't, and the legal document's drafted that it has to be a consensus between everyone, you've got a stalemate. And you've potentially got a huge problem.
Yep, and I don't know how many families out there don't have a black sheep in the family, but most do have one somewhere. So that person will turn up, I'm telling you.
Yeah. Well, it mightn't even be a black sheep either, will it? It's sometimes just well-meaning. It's just well-meaning family that, mums. I know when my grandmother had her stroke and went into care, it was highly emotional because she absolutely said, I do not want to go into care. I never want to have that happen. And she had a major stroke and she was put in care. So everyone was highly emotional, didn't know what to do, how are we going to fulfill her wishes? And when people become highly emotional, they sometimes can act irrationally. Weddings, funerals and births is the time that families break down.
Yeah, and like you say, those emotions, and people look to blame people, even though it may not be anyone's fault. But quite often we'll see everybody will step back and then they'll judge what that person did later. So it's really important. That's where we help to show some transparency with the options and that. So, yeah.
Making some options. Yep. Excellent. And now the second one we talked about was an aged care assessment or an ACAT assessment. Now, and I think you said back in the time is don't waste any time getting an aged care assessment if something goes wrong. What's an aged care assessment and why is that so important?
Okay, so in order to qualify for subsidised care, so care that's subsidised by the federal government, you must have that approval in place already. So for residential care, if you do not have a box ticked that says permanent residential, then I call that your ticket to the concert. If you don't have your ticket to the concert, you're not getting in. Well, you're not getting in yet until we get that ticket. But if you're to access some help at home, which is, absolutely vital in some cases to take some of the pressure off the spouse trying to look after people or the children, then you must go through ACAT. ACAT stands for the Aged Care Assessment Team, or in Victoria it's called ACAS. So it's the same thing. It's actually through My Aged Care, the website that the government set up, that you can make application for this. Or if people want to phone them and just check what they have in place, the number's 1-800 200 422. So it's 1-800 200 422. They can actually just make sure they've got their date of birth for the parent and also their Medicare number, and they would be able to tell you, yes, this is where it's at. You can organise an ACAT assessor to come out to your home, and it can take quite a few weeks, but that's because priority is given to those that don't have it. They're in hospital and they've got not allowed to go home. So, yeah.
Yep, it all becomes prioritised. And I know one of the things you said was carer fatigue is real and can't be underestimated. And like you said before, the lady that said, you know, I feel like I'm letting my husband down because he's got to go into care. I mean, it can actually end up, I think it was you that said this to me, Bruce, it can quite often end up that the carer becomes the one that has something go wrong, not the one being cared for due to that fatigue.
I think my mum's probably a good example of that. Dad had 2 hemorrhages on the brain at 42. She cared for him for 30 years. She looked great. She looked like they were the same age. She looked like she was going to go on forever. In fact, we always planned what we'd do with Grandma once Pa died, but we don't know what's in the plans there. So carer fatigue, the way I describe it, is as if you had 2 cards leaning against each other. It's the carer and the person being cared for. And if the carer goes down, they're both going down. And then all of a sudden, what could have been avoided turns into an absolute nightmare and an emotional, just horrific situation. So if somebody can recognise that their parent is starting to suffer because of the time and the effort they're putting in, and it's more with probably people with dementia who, as their dementia increases over time, they spend more and more time up at night, and that means the carer spends more and more time up at night, and then when they're resting
and worried what will happen while they're up.
They just got to. And then whilst the person being cared for is having a snooze or that, they're trying to catch up on their jobs. So it's just, the way I put it to people is, you're not the spouse anymore, you're the carer. There's a time to be the spouse again, even if it might be for an hour a day of quality time together instead of 23 hours a day of arguing and trying to do things to please them, but also honour what you believe you need to do as the spouse. It's a tough one.
It is. And look, as you said, that generation were very stoic and very, very independent and prided themselves on caring for family and being resilient and tough. I mean, my grandfather grew up through the Great Depression and so he saw it that he could survive. He could look after everything, even though he was legally blind and almost legally deaf at 95 or whatever it was. And yeah, they're really stoic. And I can remember actually my great uncle, when I stayed with him in England, my great auntie had dementia, and he said, I will never let her go into aged care ever. He was from that generation. And I remember he came home one day and found her, he was out in the garden doing something, came in and found her pulling a lamp apart to clean it with a bucket of water and a rag, and it was still plugged in, and she was trying to clean in around where the electrical socket was. So it was that stage was the catalyst for him to go, it's actually worse for her to be here with me because she could have died from that event very easily.
And he would have blamed himself then. So
yes, he would have. And that was the catalyst for him to accept the fact that he needed some help. So, and I think, having that discussion with family is really important, probably earlier than later, to be able to say, you need a break. Everyone needs a break, and it's okay to lean on us. And I mean, what was it said? Don't leave it too long, I think was another thing we talked about, because, 80% of care ends up, 80% of people going into care result of a stroke or a fall. And is that still about right?
That's exactly right. So over 80% of admissions to care, as much as you try to plan, over 80% of admissions into residential permanent care are from a fall or a stroke. Now, you try planning for either one of those. We don't, when we fall, we don't go, oh yeah, it's Wednesday, I'll have a fall today. It's just a complete surprise to us. So Yeah, that's hard to get around, but if you've got your enduring power of attorney, if you've got some things in order, it just makes it so much better for your loved ones who are going to be organising things for you. And Ben, I just need to say that this fear of going to care, it's a whole lot different to what it used to be. It's not like you're going to go and sit in a chair and that's where you're going to spend your day. There's a lot of activities. They cater for everybody, and some people are most suited to an older facility that has a great outlook among the gum trees or that, rather than a high rise or that. So there's a lot of places that will cater for different communities.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part is these days is as people are getting older, and they're getting much older is an obvious observation. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've had 3 grandparents in the last 5 years go into aged care. One he passed away at 97, I think it was 92 and 93. So, and they all were lonely because they were living at home, all their friends had died. You know, they go walking out in the community and they didn't know anyone because all the people had moved away. And then once they moved into care, it was a challenge. Yep, it wasn't perfect, but they actually then got some camaraderie and people of their own generation. And it actually, in many ways, not always, in many ways, actually buoyed them up a little bit and gave them a bit more spark.
We've just had a client just come back to us actually with a picture and said, here's the lady that you helped. She's so much happier because she was isolated where she was as much as we tried to communicate with her. She's put on a bit of weight again because she was a real lightweight, and we just wanted to say thanks because Mum's quality of life has improved out of sight. And I think that's a massive thing. See, we're coming up to Christmas. Now, Christmas, what that means for us is our busiest period will be coming up in January and February, and probably more so this year because Queensland's only just opening up to other states to be able to travel. But the reason for that is people haven't been to go and see mum or dad, and they talk to them and like your grandparents or your parents, what do they say? Yeah, we're fine, dear, don't worry about us, everything's fine here. Yeah, it is all fine there, but what happens is people come to visit mum or dad, they'll come into the home, first thing they'll do is they'll go, there's a pungent sort of smell, or it might be, Mum, how about we make a cuppa, and they see Mum all confused with that, or the milk's 3 weeks out of date, things like this, things that we can't tell in a phone call. So it's really important to make observations. Furniture walking, that doesn't mean like young kids and jumping on the lounge, but it means where you have a parent or a grandparent of that is basically going from one piece of furniture to the other piece of furniture, leaning on it, trying to make their way around. Remember, falls are one of the biggest risks with people. So things like that people just need to be aware of when they do visit this Christmas or any other time.
That's probably some good advice, because I was going to ask you, because you obviously, both of us coming from a farming or rural background, and that older generation, getting them out of their home or getting them off the farm is really tough. And I think my dad, they'll either have to put in a straitjacket and carry him off, or put him in a coffin and carrying him off. That's the attitude. But what are some of the things? So you mentioned that furniture walking, so leaning on furniture to get around is a really good sign. And you said some smells around the house, which means that, you know, there's possibly some incontinence and things like that, and rotting food. Is it also sort of memory issues? Like, because everyone as they get old loses their memory. I mean, it happens to all of us. I mean, my memory's not like it used to be, but, you know, what, are they the major ones, or is there some other ones you see, Bruce?
Like we have a run sheet when we provide our first interview, like what we call our information session. And one of the questions on there will be, does mum or dad have dementia? And there's many forms of dementia. And they'll go, oh, yes, absolutely. Or they'll go, no, or they'll say, well, she's or he is quite confused.
Or angry.
Sometimes, so give you a bit of background, when mum had passed away, dad tried to stay at home, and I promised her I'd keep an eye out for him, so I used to ring him every day, and he ended up having a fall and sunbaking, not really sunbaking, but face down in his driveway for 3 hours at 42-degree heat in Wagga, so that was not nice. But with Dad, in the lead up to it, he was saying some really strange things. And I didn't think too much of it because he'd had bad health for many, many years. But I actually made the comment to my wife, and I just said, and you know me, Ben, call it as it is, I said, I think the old man might be losing it. He's getting a little bit loopy on me. So that was the way I described it. And he was just saying some strange things, and I thought, okay, and he was darting all over the place. And then it was only a few days later that he rang me at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he was whispering. He was absolutely distraught because he'd been locked in the bathroom all night, thought they'd surrounded the house and were going to get him. And I said, who? And he said, his neighbours. So I could not get the neighbours to go and check on him. So it was just an absolute trauma situation. So if you can look for those signs and just go, okay, he's not just losing it, maybe there's something. Turned out with Dad, he'd scratched his calf muscle on a brick in the garden. He'd tried to fix it himself.
Got infection.
He got sepsis, and that caused him all that, because he's a very bright man. But we also hear, when I talk about the smells and that, it's the hygiene. So sometimes it's incontinence, sometimes it's just how well they're looking after themselves and their food and all that. It's not uncommon to have someone with a UTI, a urinary tract infection, that it's only a temporary sort of absence of mind, if I put it that way, rather than something that's permanent. So sometimes they can just be fixed and they're back to normal. But just recognise it, I would say, if you can.
Yeah. Okay, and that's a good idea, and I suppose it's then having is it a family discussion then, Bruce, to be able to get together and say, hey, I'm noticing Dad or Mum is displaying these behaviours, and then getting it sort of, maybe not a consensus is the right word, but having a family discussion to be able to say, how are we going to deal with that as a family, rather than one person just taking control right from the start and bulldozing their way through? Would you recommend that's the best place to start, Bruce?
I'd say every family's different. So sometimes there's one that the parents will always lean on, or they're the ones that live next door or just down the street or something like that they'll have more involvement. And like I said, not every family, but a lot of families have some that have gone a bit wayward or gone their own path and have drifted away a little bit. I think that it's a good idea to have the discussion purely for the support of that person that's trying to support them, purely to give them some support to go, this is what I'm doing, this is my concerns. Have you had any concerns like this about Mum or Dad? And if they go, I haven't talked to them for 6 months, well, maybe they should pick up the phone and have a chat to them and just see if there is something there, because the people that sometimes notice it the most are the ones that aren't seeing them regularly. So not a bad idea to just check in with one of your siblings or that, or for a mum, or like for your mum to ask you for help would be difficult, but to let her know that you're there in case that happens makes a whole lot of sense. So
yeah, it does. And it's interesting. I used to find as a financial advisor, I remember earlier in my career when I predominantly specialised in deal with retirees. So I would see, even when I was a junior burger, where I was an assistant to a senior financial advisor and I was just cutting my teeth, is I would see clients come in every 6 months and we'd actually notice deterioration in them. And it was quite shocking. You'd see people that would come in and over 2 or 3 years, because 2 or 3 years in my experience span would change, but my life experience wouldn't have changed too much. And I'd see these changes happening and then be able to have a discussion with the wife or for the husband and say, hey, look, I've noticed Bill or Mary is a little bit more forgetful. And I think, that's another good place to be able to see is your professional people as well, your doctors, your financial advisors that don't see them all the time.
Exactly. I think so. And I would suggest, like, if you hadn't seen your grandparents for a long time, when you did see them next, you go, oh, Pop's really deteriorated in the way he's walking now, or something like, or he's on a walking stick. I didn't know he was on a walking stick, because it's not something you go and herald to the rest of the world that, hey, I'm on a walking stick now. But
especially when you're from the stoic older generation.
Yes, I know. I remember asking my wife's nan, who lived to be 99 and 10 months, by the way. I told her the ink was still wet. They just hadn't posted the congratulations letter.
The letter from the Queen.
But I remember asking her on her 90th, and a lot of your rural people will definitely relate to this. I said to her, what's the invention that's made the biggest impact on your life, the biggest difference to your life? And it took her about 1 second to come back with an answer that she said, the automatic washing machine. Because she said, what used to take me 2 days, I could do in 2 hours. But you know what? If she didn't know about the automatic washing machine, she would have just kept going along and washing as she was. And it's the same with us. If we don't make ourselves known to see what's available to help mum and dad and that, they'll just keep doing it their old way and put up with it without any complaint at all, because as you said, that's the generation they are. So
they are. Yeah. I know my grandfather, he was a tough old bugger, but whenever I'd always say, how are you? And I'd say, I'm serious, how are you? And he said, I'm above the ground. It's a good day.
My feet are still on the ground.
Yeah, so I'm not dead, so it's good. And he was in terrible pain towards the end.
Yep.
But it was always, I'm not dead, so it's a good day. So it's very rare they'll tell you what's going on. So they're sort of the things. But also too, I think, we talked about, dealing with carers and powers of attorney, but it's about getting the advice as well. And obviously I'm talking to a specialist that deals in this, but it's important to get a specialist financial advisor to look at this, because there's no one answer, is there? It's not like you go, okay, I want my mum to go into care, and you go see a financial advisor and they say, oh, look, this is your only option, go and do it. There's quite often multiple ways of going about things. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, Ben, I would say that probably the saying that resonates most with me with this is, you don't know what you don't know. And the time you find out what you don't know is when it happens. So I would suggest that some financial advisors out there will have a good idea. There's no doubt about that. I actually have said the smart ones send them to a specialist. It's the same as if you're the GP that's going to work out all these things for people, and then somebody comes to you and says, listen, this toe of mine is just killing me. If you send them off to the podiatrist and they fix that up, make the pain go away, and then they walk into your office with a little bit of stealth about them, then they're going to thank you forever. So I think that if you've got a financial advisor and they don't know what to do, then get a specialist involved, because it's not threatening their position. It's adding to the professionalism that they're already providing. So, and we work with a lot of financial advisors. We don't have any investment clients or superannuation clients. We're purely there to look at the best strategies to be able to suit that person's situation, because everyone is a little different.
Of course. And what I used to love about when I used to send people over to you, Bruce, was the fact that it was never, you need to do this. This is the option you need to take. It was like, here are the options, here are the pros, here are the cons, because no strategy ever has no cons. So you need to know the pros and the cons, and then you can make an informed choice at that stage. And I think that the problem with this is, Bruce, I've always found is, the people that need it the most are the people with complicated situations quite often, and they're the ones less likely to do it. And what I mean by that is, farming families or business owning families, and they get to the point where they say, oh, mum and dad have just got, we're paying them a salary or some income, or they've got a little bit of super and they've got their house and that's about it. But then you dig into their scenario and, oh no, mum and dad still own one of the farming blocks, or mum and dad are still involved in the family trust for tax purposes and distribution or asset protection or succession planning, or mum and dad own the machinery or are in a partnership, and they don't understand that it appears that it's just on paper and it doesn't really matter, but it can have a massive impact on the complexity, can't it, Bruce? And it's really important to have in many cases, to have the advisor, the lawyer and the accountant all working together to be able to say, okay, well, how do we either fix this, or how do we adjust this to make it a smooth transition for mum and dad?
Mate, this is a very important point. We trusts are like a nightmare for aged care or Centrelink. So remember, when you're being assessed to see how much it's going to cost for your aged care, that's done through Centrelink, or these days they're called Services Australia. They make that assessment. So if you're the appointer of a trust, if you're a beneficiary of a trust, if you contributed to the trust, if you're a controller of the trust, or even seen to influence the trustee, those assets are included as your assets under assessment. So every trust is set up differently. We rely heavily on working with our clients' accountants, and sometimes we need to explain the Centrelink rules to them a little bit so that we can see how it matches. But that's a really important rule. Another really important rule, I'll just share a little story with you here. I had a lady come to me many, many years ago, probably about 7 years ago when the new rules came in. And I'll never forget this lady because her and her 3 daughters who she brought with her all had scarves on their head and they all dressed similar. I went out to greet them and to bring them into the meeting, and she said, "Oh no, they're waiting there. It's just me." And I thought, okay. And I think I said before, I just come out with whatever I'm thinking. So anyway, we sat down in the meeting and I said, "So what's going on?" And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, you've driven in all the way from a country town a little way from here." And I said, "And you've brought your 3 daughters with you, but you've asked them all to wait out the front. So what's going on?" And because she's in her mid-80s and is that generation, as polite as they are, she said, "Mr. Baynes, even though we own a $2 million property," she said, "I'm embarrassed to say we only have $18,000 in the bank." And I said, "Okay, can I ask you a bit about the property?" So what I was trying to get to here, and Ben, you know this rule because we've talked about it, it's called the 20-year farming rule. So if there's a few things that you have to meet on this and it has to be on one title and all that, I asked her a few questions and I said to her, "Listen, I'm pretty confident that you're going to meet the 20-year farm rule. And as a result of that, I think your $2 million farm is going to be excluded as an assessable asset for your husband going to care." And she tried to battle on for ages and she was just worn out. And I said to her, "He will be fully supported." And this is 7 years ago. I said, "Your only cost of care will be just over $18,000 a year." And she wasn't that excited because she said to me, "That's all the money we have. I still don't know how I'm going to afford it." And I said, "No, but I'm going to get you the full pension each. So between you, you'll get $45,000 a year because it's a full single pension each when you're separated by illness. And you'll still have your $18,000 a year." So she started crying and I said, "Can I get those 3 girls of yours in here?" Well, she said, yep. Well, she couldn't talk actually. She just nodded. I got the 3 girls in. I think they thought I'd done something to upset their mum because mum was in tears. But
and there are the 3 angry ladies coming in.
Yeah, they're looking at me like, what's happened? And I said, would you like me to tell them? And she said, yeah. She just nodded again because she was just overwhelmed with the whole situation too. And when I told them, then there was hugs all round and tears all round, which was wonderful. I didn't tell them what she had in the bank. I just said that we're going to get mum and dad the age pension. The farm's going to be excluded and we're going to, mum's going to have plenty of money to pay for dad's care and enough for her to survive at home on her own too. And that was wonderful. I love those outcomes.
Yeah, and that's knowing. That's what you don't know, isn't it? And
oh, mate, that's my why. I just get such a buzz from when that happens. I really do.
Yeah. And I think that also too, Bruce, I had plenty of stories where we found problems which people went from being happy to crying with tears that there was such a major problem, and they can be fixed a lot of the time, but you need time to do it. And especially, the 5-year rule with Centrelink, whereas if you're doing succession plans or, transferring assets to the next generation, we're basically stuck for 5 years, aren't we? Would you like to just briefly touch on that as well?
You can give away whatever assets you like. However, Services Australia or Centrelink will actually count that asset as still being yours for up to 5 years. It's called the deprivation rule. So basically what the government's saying to us is you can't just give away your assets and go, hey, I haven't got any assets, give me that age pension, pay for my aged care because I don't have any assets. And I have had some people come to me and said, well, we just put mum and dad's home over into our name because mum's already in care and dad's going in now, so we didn't want it counted. Well, guess what? It's counted still. So the Services Australia allow that you're allowed to gift a maximum, and this is whether as a single or a couple, $10,000 in a financial year to a maximum of $30,000 over 5 years. So you could give away $10,000 now and then $10,000 in July next year and then the following July and not breach those rules. Or $6,000 a year times 5 is $30,000 over that 5-year period. However, what people don't realise is if you're going to give the farm to these two boys or whatever it might be that you've got planned in your estate, and you're getting to that point where you're going, all right, I'm going to pull back a little bit and we're going to retire. If you look into, and I'm not suggesting everybody give away the farm, but we've certainly had situations, I know you have too, Ben, where that gift can be made, and then after 5 years you have a clean slate, so to speak, with Centrelink to say, okay, what do your assets look like now? Do you qualify for a age pension? And a couple homeowner can have around about $400,000 in assessable assets to get a full pension. So it depends on the income test as well, but it's certainly worth looking at if you're going, this is my plans anyway, so what if I bring that forward? What if I get to see the smile on their face? What if I get to see them on the title while I'm still here?
Well, there's two other sides to that as well. I think also is that, you know, if you're able to do that and utilise the rules, then mum and dad don't become as a financial burden. And I don't want to suggest that I think that they would be a burden, but that's the way they see it. So they go, well, we're independently funding ourselves now through the Centrelink, etc. So it doesn't become a burden on the farming business or the family, etc. So that can be a real value, and then they've got their independence. But I think this is where we insert the whole get advice. Don't just give assets away, because there are mechanisms to protect that, because obviously as you start to divest yourself of assets or intergenerationally transfer, you know, you can be left vulnerable if you don't put the appropriate documentation in place. You can have things like, and this is way outside of my pay grade, Bruce, but things like the granny flat provisions, etc., with Centrelink, which we're not going to get into today, but there's ways of potentially making a rural succession plan earlier rather than upon death to be able to get access to Centrelink or aged care benefits and benefit everyone, as long as you get the right advice. So, you know, you get the legal advice to protect yourself, etc. as well.
If you've got a financial advisor that you trust that they've done a good job in looking after you, then inquire with them about what are the gifting rules. Is this available to us now? Is it something we should consider? Or what are the consequences if we were to gift this? A lot of people think that if they give money over but call it a loan, that's probably going to be a better outcome. Well, guess what? It's still your money. So gifting can sometimes work out to be a better option. But everybody's different and everybody's got an individual situation, so it can't be covered in general advice. It's going to be something that has to be looked at on a personal basis.
It stacks up economically to get the advice, because when you look at, say, a business premises now, if someone's a business owner or a farming asset, farms are becoming ridiculously expensive. There's many, many millions tied up in them. And so, you know, there's, if you get it wrong from an intergenerational wealth transfer or from a Centrelink or from a tax point of view, it can be, you know, catastrophic financially. So getting that advice actually becomes really, really cheap, or getting the right advice becomes really, really cheap.
I think it's also smart to get your accountant, and if your accountant doesn't have the specialty with the small business capital gains tax relief rules and all that, you know, you want somebody to work with your accountant or your advisor. If they don't have that knowledge, that's going to add to the value of that arrangement or that relationship. So yeah, reach out. This is what you're paying people for, is to get advice. So make sure you do.
And I think that's really important, is having people working together. So in most instances, I know if you've got a business or a farm or something like that, it's not just coming to see you Bruce, or someone like you. It's basically you need to be able to speak to the lawyer to see, how does this impact our estate plan? How does this impact our business entity and any agreements that are in place? You need the financial advisor about funding. You know, how does superannuation play into this? Because as I think we talked about the other day when we first talked about the topic, is people think that your superannuation, it falls under your will, etc., whereas it doesn't necessarily do that. So it's about getting the right advice from the right people. And the unfortunate part is it is so complicated these days that one person never, ever has all the answers. And if they tell you they do, they're lying. And I love the famous one is when people say to me, oh, my accountant or my financial advisor or my lawyer knows all that I need to know. And I say, well, there's two questions you got to ask yourself. Are they stupid or are they a liar? Because nobody has all the answers. And that's why the best outcome you'll get is to have, the people that are required to be involved with the specialist knowledge in each area are actually involved in it.
Quite often we will direct people back to their advisor with regard to superannuation, like you just spoke about. Now, superannuation is about the only, other than capital gains tax that is payable on some assets when you sell them, or inherited capital gains by an estate. But superannuation, as you know, Ben, is only tax-free to a tax dependent. So as much as the superannuation legislation, I think it's under Section 10, nominates that your child is a dependent under superannuation laws, well, they're always your child. No matter how old they are, they're always your child. But they're not always a financial dependent or in an interdependent relationship. So we see tax of up to 17% payable if that money were to go to an estate. So sometimes we will look to go, is that where we need to cash in some funds to help pay the costs of residential care, in the knowledge that by doing that, we're extinguishing that tax being paid by the estate later on. So we look at that, and we rely on solicitors, we rely on superannuation experts and that to assist us in that area. So like you say, each to their own. So
yeah, exactly. Excellent. Well, look, we've sort of dug through a few things there, so that's been absolutely fantastic. I think just going back to that original one, which was get advice, don't listen to us. This is just general information. Make sure you get that advice. And look, I see this all the time where people will go, I heard so-and-so on the radio or on a podcast, and that's what I'm going to go do. There's so much context that people lose, and everyone's situation's different. And if you catch one little bit of information and go, oh, that'll suit us, and there can be significant unintended consequences. So always go and get advice. So now, Bruce, what we might do, mate, is one day down the track, we might also come in and have maybe have a little bit of a discussion. What I wouldn't mind doing for everyone is to actually have a discussion, maybe with someone like yourself and a lawyer in the room and myself, and we can actually run through a scenario and say, okay, well, what are the things we need to be aware of there? Because I think when it comes to farmers and graziers and business owners, there is complexity. It's not as easy as mum and dad live in a house in town with a little bit of money in the bank. So that'd be great if we could do that down the track.
I would suggest, Ben, that my specialty is with aged care now, and it has been for some time. Solicitors have specialties too. So don't go to your conveyancing solicitor who just represents you with the buying and selling of different houses or properties. You need to see an estate planning specialist sometimes. Sometimes you don't have to, because it's pretty straightforward, but an estate planning specialist, they'll cost you, but they will save you as well. So I think that's really important. So
yeah, I think that's a great point. And to sort of end us off here, Bruce, mate, I like to ask everyone this question at the end because it's really important to me. What's your true definition of wealth?
Okay, my true definition of wealth. Well, I would not say it's money. I would say I'll share something with you, and this is what influences me and what I do and what's important to me. I was sitting on the balcony of a 2-story home with this client of mine he used to be a client of mine in retirement, and then when I sold the practice and I went to doing just aged care, he approached me knowing that he would have to go into care. Now, I won't say his name, but he was 95 years of age. Oh, actually, I'll just call him Fred, okay? He was 95 years of age. We're sitting on his balcony, and he just told me that he had terminal cancer. Now, he was quite accepting of the fact that he didn't have a lot of time and that, and we were just basically having a cuppa and just reflecting a little bit on a couple of things, and I was just letting him know that everything was all in order. Anyway, I said to him, I made the comment just offhand, I said, well, Fred, you've certainly accumulated a lot of assets in your lifetime. This house, straight opposite the water here and all that, and he had a couple of $1 million behind him, and I said, you've certainly accumulated some assets. And then he said something that he gave me his slant on what wealth was, I think, and I adopted it straight away. He said to me, Bruce, he said, in my lifetime, he said, and in your lifetime too, he said, you will have assets that you have to have. You'll have assets that come and go. And he said that car you needed to buy or whatever it was. And he said, but those assets will leave you one day. He said the only things that you have that are really make up your wealth, he said, are the experiences and the memories that those assets gave you, or those experiences gave you. And it just resonated with me. In our family, there's been a couple of health issues where we make sure we enjoy every day enjoy every year. Farmers don't farm because they got the farm passed down. Farmers farm because they love what they do. They love to work 7 days a week. They love to work long hours. They love to, I don't know why they love to gamble on the weather and all that, but it's what they love to do. And it's all the experiences they have with everybody else that shares that with them, or with their mates, and that makes the world a difference. So I think that's what true wealth is, if you ask me, Ben. To me, it certainly is.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And it's actually more of us should ask the people that are closer to the end of their life that have got good wisdom and experience, because I think when you get to the end, it won't be money that you reflect back on. It will be exactly what you talked about. And unfortunately, we're in a world where we are fixated about money. Now, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't focus on being financially secure for our family, but it's not the thing that when you're on your rocking chair or on your deathbed, you're going to look back and go, gee, I'm glad I saved an extra $10 on those secateurs buying them online rather than from Bunnings.
But Ben, I would say to everybody out there that if you've got an aging parent or if you've got an aging grandparent and you haven't picked up the phone, if you haven't talked to them, you haven't gone and visited them, get onto it, because they have a wealth of experience. They have stories that if you don't talk to them, they're going to die with them, and you need to have those stories, because I have some wonderful stories from parents and grandparents and that, and I've shared them with my kids, and I think it's really important. So that's the wealth.
Yeah, appreciate that. That's great. I love that, Bruce. I love that. And this is why we became friends many years ago, because we have similar values and an outlook on life.
So good-looking dudes, eh?
Oh, well, faces for radio, Bruce.
That's it, me.
Or podcasts.
Me especially.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'll put some show notes in and mention where people can find you. You're a great guy. I know you love helping people, so I know that if anyone wants some help or some aged care advice, or even just have a chin wag with someone, reach out to Bruce. And as I said, I'll put those in the show notes and at the end.
Ben, we do have a free ebook on our website, so that's a good idea. And it's just called A Step-by-Step Guide to Arranging Aged Care. And being an ebook, we update it with all the changing numbers and that. So, mate, I just want to say thanks for reaching out to me, because I do love country people. I love that rural background, and I love the way they look at life and grab it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bruce. Thanks very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Ben.
You can find Bruce by Googling Sage Care Advice. That's SAGE Care Advice. He's on the website, and he's also got a Facebook page. They also have a really, really good ebook on the website, which I've actually read and downloaded and given away to a lot of people, which is full of information. And because it's an ebook, it's regularly updated. Now, feel free to tag Bruce in any comments that you've got, or let me know in the comments on what you thought of today's episode. What was the most valuable? Don't forget, you can also join our new private Facebook group called the Financial Blokes Wealth and Wisdom. Finally, a reminder to keep the lawyers happy. The information contained in this podcast is general in nature and for education purposes only. It's not financial advice, and you shouldn't act on the information without appropriate specific advice for your particular circumstances. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll catch you with a new episode in 2 weeks' time.